my home country of Russia has a very long and a very rich history and also a very diverse culture. Russian people are overall very proud of their culture, their language and their literature. But guys, what if I told you that the greatest writer and poet of the Russian literature and also the person who created the Russian language was actually a black man?
The Russian language that we know today can be attributed to a black man named Alexander Pushkin. He created the modern Russian language because they were speaking French and other types of language there.
Had it not been for someone like Alexander Pushkin, Russians would be speaking French today.
Yes, people, that is correct. The Yakubian creatures known as the Russian people have been finally exposed, and the great Russian language that the Russian people are so proud of was actually created by a black man. And in fact, before this black man Alexander Pushkin created the Russian language, Russian people actually spoke French. Let's talk about the real facts. Hey there people, it is your boy Roman, your favorite neighborhood Russian, and in today's video, we are going to be exploring the real story behind the creation of the Russian language and Russian culture and getting down to the bottom and figuring out the real truth about Russia's greatest writer, Alexander Pushkin. Now, some of you guys might have a question, what exactly is happening in this video that we just watched and who is this? The video we watched actually comes from Tariq Nasheed, a pretty famous person, an African-American public speaker, director, who's basically, to put it short, as part of a movement that in the African-American community is usually called Hoteps. Now, by the way, I apologize if I get anything wrong here because, you know, I'm clearly not part of the black community, as you can see. So, Hoteps is actually a term that describes a certain part of the African-American community, a subculture that features a lot of people with sort of Afrocentric, a lot of the time extremist sort of radical pro-black views. And there's a lot of movements that are included usually in this category. The biggest one is probably Nation of Islam and Louis Farrakhan. Yes, by the way, that is the one where they believe that the white race was created by an evil black scientist named Yakub with a massive head, right? And in their ideology, white people are basically considered as inherently evil Yakubian creatures created to spite black folks. There's some other famous ones like the 5%er movement, for example, or Black Hebrew Israelites, which is a group that essentially believes that black people are the real Jews and that the Jewish people are actually like devils who are pretending to be Jews even though black people are the real Jews from the land of Israel or whatever. I mean, funnily enough, as a Russian, I found out about a lot of these movements from rap music, from like listening to like Guru, Jay-Z and Nas. A lot of African-American rappers happen to be part of this movement. Like even Kanye West, for example, he said that black people are the real Jews, so... And a lot of these groups, they also oppose interracial marriage between black and white people. A lot of famous speakers online like Dr. Umar, for example, talk about this. By the way, he's one of the funniest human beings in existence.
Black queens forever, snow bunnies never. I said black queens forever, snow bunnies never.
I beg your pardon? I beg your pardon?
You don't find that suspicious? You don't find that suspicious?
And while I can understand that some of these sentiments in the black community are rooted sort of in the oppression that they had to face from white people in America, these people are pretty widely criticized in the black community as well. Because a lot of the time they pretty much spread false information, pseudo-history. According to them, anybody famous in history that ever has done anything was black. Like, you know, for example, stuff like this.
Suleiman taught Mozart. Who's Suleiman? Suleiman's a Moor, he's an African. Who's Beethoven? Beethoven was Thoven Bey. He was a Moor.
His mother was a Moor. Yes. And when he went deaf, that melanin kicked in. The inner eye kicked in. He heard music.
The melanin kicked in is crazy, but look, I'm not even gonna dispute this. All I'm saying is, this is just the African-American version of how Armenians, in the post-Soviet world, this is a joke, Armenians usually say that they are the ones who invented civilization, invented essentially everything, every dish, every invention ever. Everybody of any note in history was actually secretly Armenian, and even Joseph Stalin, famously Georgian, was secretly Armenian too, so like... It is very similar in that regard, and also, Alexander Pushkin, the Russian writer and poet, from the point of view of these people, he's essentially the Russian Yakub. He's the black man that created the current Russian society.
The Russian language that we know today can be attributed to a black man named Alexander Pushkin. He created the modern Russian language because they were speaking French and other types of language there.
Facts.
Had
Truth.
it not been for someone like Alexander Pushkin, Russians would be speaking French today.
A lot of people...
Truth nuke, guys. So yes, guys, for me as a Russian who is also aware of who, like, Dr. Umar is...
I don't know exactly who you are. Lord have mercy.
We must stay focused, brothers. We must stay focused.
Seeing these worlds collide for me is absolutely incredible. But guys, now let's actually get down to the facts here and really discuss what they said here. So, first of all, right, I need to debunk one thing, and that is the idea that the Russian people were actually speaking French and other types of languages before Alexander Pushkin invented the Russian language. No. First of all, yes, the Russian poet and writer Alexander Pushkin is credited and is kind of regarded in Russia and in the world as the father of the modern Russian language. So he's kind of the Russian version of Shakespeare in a sense, right? He took a language that was very disjointed, disorganized, didn't have many norms, and he created a new way of using the language, and he combined all these different norms and forms of the language, all these different dialects into one thing, and kind of created the modern Russian speech and the modern Russian literature style. However, the regular Russian people were pretty much never speaking French. Yes, it is true that French was actually spoken in Russia among the higher elite society, so essentially people that were connected to the royal family, to governing the country. Especially in the 1800s, it was actually considered fashionable to speak French in public settings, you know, when all these aristocrats and all these noble people would meet. Instead of speaking the Russian language, which is their native language, they all spoke French, and you know, it was basically a flex. If you were able to speak French very fluently with no accent, you were cool. French was a popular language at the time and was the lingua franca of Europe, right? Which is where the name lingua franca literally comes from, by the way. But you understand that the regular people, the serfs, the peasants, essentially living somewhere in rural Russia, plowing the field or whatever, these people were not speaking French, okay? They just spoke a simple version of Russian, and the dialects were different depending on where you were in the country. So French was mostly spoken by the nobility that was trying to stand out from the crowds and be a level above all these peasants and serfs. And the second thing that I have to say about this is that actually there is a bit of truth to this statement, and well, in general, black Russians do actually exist. They've existed throughout history, they exist now. I even have a couple of friends that are black Russians. I even made a video with one of them, an interview a couple of years back. You can check it out, it's pretty interesting. And in general, yes, Russians can actually look very different. There's Asian Russians, like Viktor Tsoi, for example. He was Korean and Russian, famously. There's black Russians who spend their whole life in Russia, their native language is Russian, you know? So an existence of a black Russian is not an outlandish claim or something, right? However, you guys need to understand that the topic of Alexander Pushkin and his race and nationality is actually pretty controversial in Russia. However, the truth is that Alexander Pushkin did actually have African ancestry. In fact, his great-grandfather was originally from Africa. And in general, Russians are pretty aware of this. Actually, in Russia, there's a lot of memes and jokes about how essentially, you know, Pushkin was black, he was gangsta, he was like a rapper basically because he was a poet, you know, and if he's black, that makes him a rapper. That's just, you know, how the Russian mind works. You can find like a lot of pictures on the Russian internet of edits of like Alexander Pushkin made to look like a rapper, like a gangster or whatever. And also a big part of the joke is also about how, well, you might not have known about this, but Alexander Pushkin was actually killed in a duel shootout. He was shot by a French man who was essentially living in Russia, and it was all over a dispute over a woman. And obviously you can imagine the jokes coming out of this, you know. It gives Russians an even more of a reason to call him a gangster because, you know, he got shot in a gunfight or whatever. Because of course I guess that is the stereotype of a black man in Russia. Somebody who walks around with a gun, gets shot and, you know, has like chains on or something, whatever. So yes, because Pushkin wrote rhymes, he wrote bars, because he died in a shootout and got shot, and because he was black, people basically think it's funny and they call him like the Russian gangster, the Russian Tupac, whatever it is. But really the truth is that Alexander Pushkin apparently was about 1/8 black.
1/8 black.
Afternoon, my octoroon. Come on, bring it in there. Tuck that.
Yeah, I'm in there, dog. I'm in there, dog.
You see, Alexander Pushkin actually had a very interesting ancestry. His great-grandfather was Abram Petrovich Ganibal, who was a Russian military engineer, general, and also a nobleman of African origin. Now, his story is pretty crazy. He was born in the 1690s, either in Cameroon, Ethiopia, or Eritrea, it's actually debated where. At a certain time, his birthplace was attacked by the Ottoman Turks, and he was actually transferred to Constantinople, or Istanbul, with a Russian-Serbian ambassador, Sava Vladislavich Raguzinsky, who was in Istanbul on behalf of Peter the Great, the Emperor of Russia, was supposedly either bought or kidnapped but was brought to the Russian Empire, to Peter the Great, Apparently Peter the Great really liked the kids, kinda made him a part of his family and even baptized them, and Peter the Great was actually the godfather. Abram Gannibal then studied in Europe and France, and he kinda was part of also Russia's Enlightenment movement in a sense, because Peter the Great was the Russian emperor that was trying to, you know, open a window to Europe and to make Russia more Europeanized in a sense. And this ancestor of Pushkin, Abram Gannibal, had a lot of children, had a lot of offspring. Actually, a lot of European aristocrats, even British ones, descend from him, and his great-grandson was Alexander Pushkin. And essentially, counting how many generations it has been, supposedly, according to some estimates, Pushkin is supposed to be like 75% Russian, 12.5% African, and 12.5% Swedish. But Pushkin definitely stood out from the crowd in Russia at that time. He has swarthy skin, he had different hair, he looks a lot different compared to a lot of people. So yeah, at the end of the day, the truth is that Alexander Pushkin, Russia's greatest poet and the creator of the modern Russian language, actually was part black and actually has some black ancestry. But to claim that, you know, I guess he was fully a black man is not exactly historically correct maybe, or claiming that he created the Russian language and people spoke French before is also, you know, not exactly historically correct. And this is kind of pretty much the issue with a lot of the pseudo-history coming from these types of people, right? I definitely think that these people have a point when they say that the United States and especially Europe at one point were greatly influenced by Africa, the Muslim world, and so on, and that impact is definitely under-discussed, I guess, and ignored by a lot of people. However, once again, saying that Pushkin invented the Russian language and that, you know, Yakub created white people is also not exactly, you know, historically accurate, so... That being said though, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully I really got down to the bottom of the truth here if Russians really were speaking French before a black man created the Russian language. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, then please make sure to slap the like button on it. If you guys would like to support me additionally, and that is financially, you can go to the link down in the description and either buy me a coffee or become a channel member here on YouTube, or do a super thanks underneath this video. That being said, guys, thank you so much for watching it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.